Thanks, Max, for joining us here. Congratulations on a big fundraise, which you don't want to talk about. 275 million for Affirm.
Yep.
So the obvious question, you have all this money in the bank to build the bank. What are you guys doing? What do you want to do?
We want to build the biggest bank in the world. So one thing about the round that's important to understand is that it is a mix of debt and equity. And so vast majority of the money on both tranches actually will be used to lend for our users and put to work at the point of sale. So it is not the, despite the enormous sounding raise, which it certainly is, it is not there to gold plate our offices or anything of the sort. But the goal and the use for this capital is to put it to work. Banks definitionally take money, lend it out, and with that create more money, create jobs, let people invest in their future.
What does the young millennial consumer, the young banker, want? What are their problems? What are they seeking for in their finances these days?
They're very interesting people. I've come to spend a lot of time with millennials, not just by way of many of them being employees at Affirm, but just by studying many different surveys, meeting with our customers. It's fascinating, the intersection of being witness to the 2008 financial collapse, front row, most influenceable, impressionable teenage years, watching their parents struggle and the big financial institutions do nothing about it but let them sell their houses short and go into bankruptcy, had a very profound impact on these people who are now no longer kids. They're actually entering sort of financial lives as adults for the first time. They have no taste for big corporate America. They have no trust in banking brands. And for the first time, they're realizing that you can't live entirely debit card purchase to debit card purchase, even though over 60% of millennial generation does not have or use a credit card.
60%?
66%, if I remember correctly. And it's an unbelievable sounding stat, but if you ask around anybody who was born after 1980, and you ask them, what is your number one preferred mode of paying for things, the instant answer is it's a debit card. Like, I don't really need a credit card, I don't want a credit card. It's designed to put you into debt, screw you, catch you when you're not looking. And so this is the times in their lives when they realize it's time to go out and get an apartment, buy nicer furniture, set up a kitchen, set up a house. And so they start realizing that they need access to credit, but their lives to date have been lived entirely outside the field of view of both the big financial institutions and the credit bureaus. And so they are new consumers of credit, but they're ill-equipped and are not recognized by the traditional players.
And so with Affirm, you're changing that, but you also want to build a bank. So if you could start from scratch and build the Max Levchin bank, what would it do? How would that be different than Bank of America, different than Chase?
This is the how do I count the ways kind of question, but there's definitely, well, for one, I am trying to do it, so I believe I am going down the path that is right. The number one thing that the millennial customer today really struggles with is getting access to credit they can trust. It's actually kind of an interesting problem because typically when you think of a consumer of a credit product or credit service, the challenge they face is, are they trustworthy? Does the bank, does the lender want to give them money? Do they trust them? And the flip side is very much in play here. A typical 21-year-old comes into a bank and the first question on their mind, are these guys going to screw me? Like, is this really something that I want to do? And most of the time they answer themselves, I don't want to be a part of this thing. The print on the back of the statement is too small. Mm-hmm. They have no mobile app. I don't really want to meet a teller in person. I'm not going to go into a branch. So all these things are signals for us, people trying to build a brand new financial ecosystem, what to do and what not to do. The number one thing to do is to build a trustworthy brand, trustworthy product that signals to the customer, this is honest and transparent. You'll know exactly what the costs are. You'll know exactly when the payments are due. There will be no gotchas. There will be no floating rates that suddenly change under your bill to bill. And so that's what we're doing first and foremost. there's lots to do after that. We are trying to build different kinds of credit products. We've initially started just at the point of sale online, helping people finance fairly understandable purchases such as furniture and engagement rings and electronics, and very quickly saw demand offline. So we introduced a product that would let people, inside salespeople, and at the point of sale in a physical world, consumers would come in, finance purchases. And then it turned out that a lot of these millennials went to college and majored in things they loved, but not necessarily things that paid really well. And so pretty quickly we sort of asked the question, well, what are they going to do with that? How are they going to pay their bills? And sure enough, there's a giant, rapidly growing industry called new economy skill training, likes of General Assembly and Metis, and several additional companies, Hack Reactor, Dev Bootcamp, all these guys popping up all over the place, basically helping a geography major that's 21 years old and suddenly realizing that they're entirely unemployable become a JavaScript programmer in 6 weeks or less. Except these are not federally accredited, and so there's no financial aid available. So we said, well, why don't we lend to these people? They seem like incredibly low risk. Once they are done graduating, they'll immediately go get a job at 3 times their current earning capacity. So we partnered with the companies I just named, and we're now lending at the educational point of sale, which to me is the best kind of a loan we can make. It literally lets people invest in a happier, wealthier, better compensated version of themselves. So that's sort of the next step, and then they're going to need to buy a car, they're going to need to finance their house. I expect to be with them for the rest of their life.
So you're one of the first early PayPal guys, and suddenly payments and fintech are hot and sexy now. What are you seeing? Like, what excites you in the payment world? And like 5 years from now, are we still using credit cards, or is there something different?
So very much part of my roadmap is reinventing what credit card is, how it works, what it looks like. And I won't spoil the surprise once we launch the product, but I think credit card form factor and intelligence underneath have remained exactly the same for good 50 years at this point.
50 years?
50.
So we're still paying with no more, all this phone swiping stuff is just a fad?
It's all marginal. No. So that's where the state of the industry today is. It was really neat NFC experiment going on here and there. There's people scanning QR codes, and it's actually very popular in Asia, not so much in the US. But fundamentally, vast majority of point of sale, physical point of sale transactions happen when you swipe a card. And the reality is that user interface is actually not so bad. My favorite sort of mental experiment to run is imagine a multi-lane checkout environment, which is kind of an industry term for walking out of Whole Foods or Costco or Safeway. You got a big cart in front of you packed with stuff, and if you're a young parent, you have a baby on your arm and a baby's screaming, and you got to check out. Swiping a card and signing a statement or signing an electronic terminal is not a bad user experience. The thing that's terrible is that all the software from that point on that runs a transaction and handles everything from the receipt to repayment to reminders is built roughly in 1975, the year I was born, by COBOL developers, most of which are now dead, actually dead. And if you look, this is all true, if you look at the recruitment postings from most big banks, they're actively advertising exciting opportunities in COBOL development. So this is entirely factual. So I think the user interface will evolve. I think the NFC adoption will happen. I think a lot of sort of proximity pay, even slightly more innovative stuff that's happening will happen. But fundamentally, the swiping of the card or some equivalent of it isn't such a bad thing. It's the software in a backend that must be innovated on, and that's what we're working on. And that's also why it's so hard for the larger traditional financial institutions to do something about this. It is a really, really, really difficult thing to swallow, a big rewrite. And if you're in COBOL, you're going to have to rewrite it. You can't just patch it up.
Okay.
Remember at PayPal, we started and stopped a rewrite of our system, which at the time was no more than 4 years old, maybe 3 times before we finally decided we had it right.
What do you think about Apple Pay?
I think it's actually pretty cool. It's very, very early, but the one thing that people don't really understand or perhaps note about Apple Pay is it's the single largest database of active credit card numbers in the world. Apple knows more active payment instruments than anyone else by a giant margin, which is fascinating because they could compete with PayPal or with Amazon if they just sort of built out their missing pieces very, very quickly. Apple Pay at the point of sale, I've watched people at Whole Foods try to use it, and default to a credit card because it's just too hard to learn. It'll take time to get adoption, but it'll probably happen. Apple Pay integrated into an app to buy physical goods is mesmerizing. I'm an investor in this little company called Delectable. It's a sort of a fancy wine snobbery bottle information type feed. And one of the things that they've just added is you tap on the bottle you like and you can buy it if there's a merchant that sells it in the real world. It's Apple Pay powered. It's amazing. You can get a lot of wine very quickly into your very small cellar.
And you mentioned mobile before. Like, how important is like a mobile presence for banking? And
critical. It's no longer optional. I think one of the most embarrassing moments I had recently with a very large physical retailer. So I went in to sort of do a pitch. Affirm, you are a millennial buyer, and there's a millennial buyer. You're selling very, very nice kitchen appliances for a couple of $1,000s a piece. The buyer can't afford it. Don't you want us there? I say, yeah, fantastic. And I understand you guys are primarily offline. And the guy looked at me and said, just because we have a ton of stores does not mean we're primarily online. We're primarily offline. We're primarily on mobile now. So even the giant sort of a top 100 retail brands in America are now rapidly becoming dominantly online sellers. And by online, they mean shop on your phone, buy on your tablet, and more increasingly, shop on your phone, buy on your phone. So it's converting.
And with fintech being there's a lot of startups, and if you're trying to tackle the fintech world outside of Affirm, what advice would you have for someone who wants to get into that business or wants to start a company to shake things up? What lessons have you learned?
Look for, there's tons of opportunity. It's literally, if not the largest, second largest market in the world. So don't be worried about, it's already too hot, there's too many. The fact there's lots of investment dollars available for it is a good thing. Frankly, the fact there's a lot of competition is almost immaterial. In the consumer revolving credit space alone, there's just over $1 trillion outstanding balances right now. It is not exactly a soon-to-run out of addressable market kind of a space. So I would go in, if that's your passion, you have to be aware of a couple of things. It is not don't do it if you want to build something quickly and flip it. To do something meaningful in fintech, you have to be willing to go through a lot of years, a lot of money, a large team fairly quickly because you need compliance, you need legal, you need customer service. You're very regulated, so you need to very quickly understand what's legal, what's not. If it seems sensible, it might not be legal still, so especially if you're a lender. But as much as I love the American millennial customer and plan to spend next year or two being very, very focused there, it's already too tempting not to go international, and there's incredible opportunities, especially in developing parts of the world like Africa. I just looked at a couple of startups in Kenya lending money directly on the phone using M-Pesa for a settlement mechanism, and the growth and the demand is unbelievable. So there's just explosion of financial technology demand worldwide. And there's as much in kind of the intermediary part where you're helping people transfer risk from one pocket to another as there is in on-balance sheet world where you are actually taking principal risk yourself.
Are there any big traditional banks doing it well, just doing innovation well, doing technology well?
A couple. I would say Capital One has always been at the very forefront of innovation in big banking. They're a startup themselves. They weren't around in the 1970s. They were founded in the 80s. And they are still doing it. They just acquired a couple of small companies. They're doing some very bold moves in their internal technology, from what I can tell. Let's say a couple of European banks come to mind. In the US, the really big guys are kind of waiting on the sidelines. And I think a lot of this cannot be done by big banks definitionally, because the cost of screwing up while trying to do something really cool and innovative is very, very high, while the incremental value of getting it right is necessarily small. I think, if I remember correctly, the largest American bank has $1.6 trillion in deposits or something. I may be misquoting this, but imagine a one-off or off by one bug in that code while you're trying to innovate something really clever in some pocket of consumer credit, and there's a 1% leak of that dollar amount. That's a lot of very, very, very unhappy customers.
What surprises kind of await us in the next few years in the fintech, banking, money, and payment world? Like, is there anything coming along you think is going to really shake things up?
I'll make a bold prediction. I think vast majority of the people in this room probably have a credit card in their pocket or a debit card, although a credit card is much more important for this example, that has a logo on the front that is not the logo of the issuing bank. For example, I have a Chase card that has in giant letters the word United written on it, and I flew here on a United flight because, of course, every time I swipe my card, I get a few more miles. In Europe, this was also true until just a little bit ago when the European Parliament unceremoniously forced the interchange, which is the fee, the origination fee for every card swipe that the issuing bank charges to the merchant. They legislated it down to essentially zero. So the way, this is a little bit technical, but it's worth understanding, the way the reward systems work, the miles that I get for using my United card works like this. I go to a snack bar around here, I swipe my card, I pay the full price, cash or credit, same thing. The bar receives all that money minus roughly 3% that goes to Chase, my issuing bank. Okay. Chase then turns around and goes to United and says, we'd like to buy some discounted air miles because Max needs his reward program. And that 3% pays for those miles. In Europe, these reward programs are going to disappear over the next 12 months.
So no more rewards?
No more rewards, because the issuing bank no longer is getting their 3%, they're getting 0.3%. There might be some clever techniques, but the 1% cash back or 3% cash back in Europe is all going to move from the banking side to the merchant side. If a merchant wants to say, you know what, you're such a great snack buyer, I'm going to give you a 50% off my next snack purchase, that's great. But no merchant in the world will say, thank you for buying snacks, here, some United miles for you. Like, that's just not in their best interest.
So your prediction is that rewards will be dead in America in the next couple of years?
Well, I am confident that the likes of American legislative and regulatory bodies are watching what's going to happen in Europe. It's happened in Europe. There's no going back. There's about $20 billion of interchange income that's going to get taken out of the system kind of overnight. And little merchants are cheering because it's a 3%. They didn't really understand why they have to pay to fund my United miles. If this really sticks, and it did because it had a chance to get struck down over the summer in 2014, did not. The implementation cycle just began. If it really comes to pass, and it looks like it will, I think MasterCard Europe and Visa Europe spent about $1 billion lobbying trying to get rid of this, and it didn't happen. It will come to America. What will it feel like if your United card no longer is United, just says Chase, thank you for banking?
Yeah.
So that's going to be just a very interesting thing to experience, and it's going to be an opportunity for every reward management startup under the sun to stick their neck in and say, all of you merchants, you need to band together, and we will manage the rewards. Wow. So that's going to be just a big disruption, tectonic shift in the fintech world, I think.
It's a big change. We have 20 seconds left. What's your opinion on Bitcoin? Very quick.
I think it's shown to be a fairly bad investment, especially if you bought at the peak, which I did not. It's a interesting commodity, but I'm fairly bearish on it as a commodity. As a technology, blockchain is amazing. Not a week doesn't go by that I kind of don't go back to think about how Merkle trees were used for the first time in a really interesting way. So I would predict that blockchain and blockchain offshoot projects and companies will go very far. My sense, Bitcoin itself, the currency, is likely to be immaterial for a little while. If it gets very stable, which is it's now stabilizing, and actively legislated by the US government, it might have real legs as a medium of exchange, but for now, I would look at the technology 10 times more often than the currency itself.
Awesome. Well, that's a great place to end. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.